I'd like to speak now, in the short period we have, about a topic of the Shoah. And it's very daunting to speak about the Holocaust because it's so difficult to perceive, so difficult to understand. Particularly, I'd like to speak about Hashgacha. And by Hashgacha, I mean Hashem's presence and the awareness of Hashem, as opposed to Hashkafa. Hashkafa would mean we're trying to look for reasons to understand, and perhaps the human mind is incapable. But to see the divine hand, I think that we are capable of. And of course, when we're aware of Hashem's presence, we know that there has to be purpose, and there has to be love. This perhaps is what Hashem himself was hinting to Eov, when Eov, who was living a very successful, productive life with family and wealth, and it's all taken away from him because of the test of the Satan. So basically, Eov searches to try to understand, and philosophically he can't, and his friends try to explain, he can't. Finally, in chapter 38, Hashem himself comes to Eov, and Hashem says the famous words, "Where were you when I created the world?" And he talks to Eov about the creation, perhaps in our terminology, about the magnificence of the design of the cell, or the magnificence of the emergence of the universe with all its perfection. And as a result of these discussions, Eov is comforted for his loss. He doesn't talk about the whys, but what he does do is he makes Eov more further aware that I'm real, and that I'm here, and that everything in your life is also me. And the more we make that reality true, the more we're able to deal with any circumstance. So with that as an introduction, I'd like to talk just about a few interesting things about the Holocaust that struck me. Number one, as we had an Emmett trip this past May, and we were standing in Warsaw, and we were standing by the Umschlagplatz, which was the train station where Jews were deported to from the Warsaw Ghetto to Treblinka, where 800,000 Jews were murdered through gas. So it was pointed out that what was the date of the first deportation from the Warsaw Ghetto? It was Tisha B'Av. Interesting. Tisha B'Av. Once again, there it is. And if we go back even a little bit further into the history of the Shoah, we discover that the conference called Wannsee Conference, which was in Germany in 1942, at which the final solution was mapped out by Eichmann and Himmler and Heydrich. The date of that conference where it was signed that the Jews of Europe were to be destroyed was Erev Tisha B'Av. Once again, Tisha B'Av seems to be surfacing. But I think it's very interesting if we go back to the beginning of it all. The beginning of the Shoah perhaps began at the beginning of World War II. World War II is really a connection that many say of World War I, just one long war. World War I, we know, started on Tisha B'Av. But World War II started on a particular date, and it started on September 9th, 1939. What's interesting is, September 9th, 1939, the Parsha that Jews throughout Europe were reading, and Jews throughout the world were reading, was Parshas Ki Savo. Ki Savo is the Parsha of the Tochacha, the Parsha of the rebuke. I'd like just to read a few of the psukim from the rebuke, from the Tochacha Ki Savo. And imagine that you're a Jew in 1939, and you're witnessing now the Germans with a new method of warfare called Blitzkrieg, raining bombs on Poland, and you're reading the following Parsha. Listen to what you're reading in 1939 and ask yourself the question, in 1945, did you see these things come true? The Parsha says, first of all, Moshe Rabbeinu tells us, Devarim Ki Savo, chapter 28, verse 37, if we don't follow Hashem's ways, Ha'isi l'shama l'mashal l'shinina, we're going to be confused. We're going to be an object of hatred. Ulishinina, we're going to be scorned and mocked. First of all, confused. I think if there's any word that defines the Holocaust, it's confusion. In fact, Menachem Zemba, one of the great Gedolim of the generation, commented before he was murdered in the Warsaw Ghetto. He commented and he said that although the Jewish people is the wisest of all nations, Hashem removed that wisdom from us. We didn't know what to do. Every direction was a dead end. Confusion, the mushal, hatred, mocked. And then in 43, chapter 43, in Pasuk 43, it says, Ager asher b'kirbecho, yalech malamalu, v'ata tered mata. The stranger in your midst is going to rise up and up, and you're going to go down and down. The stranger in your midst, who's the stranger? Wherever we went, somehow there were nations, there were people so willing to persecute us. Sometimes they emerge from the lowest members of society. People who had been criminals, now in charge and ruling over great Rabbanim, the princes of the Jewish nation. They're going up and up, and we're going down and down. And in Pasuk 48 it says, V'yavadatas Hashem oivecho, asher yishlachenu Hashem bach b'ravu b'tzameh. And you're going to be enslaved to your enemies. And you're going to serve them in hunger and in thirst. Slavery. The Jewish nation was basically sold into slavery once again. In hunger and in thirst. Hunger killed more than 70,000 people in the Warsaw Ghetto. Hunger, it says that the average caloric intake of a Jew in the Warsaw Ghetto was about 300 calories per day. That's approximately a small cup of Cheerios. That was the intake. Starvation. Hunger like we never saw before. Thirst. One need read the biography of the Klausenberger Rabbi, where he describes the death march that he was on. As they're marching to Germany, as they're walking by a river, they're forbidden to drink. And anyone who reaches his head down to drink is shot. And he tells them a great miracle as they lay down finally to rest. All of a sudden, out of the ground sprouted water. One of the great miracles that he describes. But thirst, hunger and thirst. And it continues, and it says that a nation is going to come upon you. A nation is going to swoop down you like a nesher, like an eagle. An eagle, we know, is the symbol of Rome. It's also the symbol of the Nazis. Their flag is marked with the nesher, with the eagle. But it doesn't stop there. The Psukim continue. And they say, Gam kol choli v'kol makro asher lo kasa b'sefer HaTorah azos, yalam Hashem alecho ad hishomdecho. There's all sorts of suffering and torture like we've never seen before. There's going to be sickness. So many Jews died of typhus, the sicknesses that surrounded us. And then in verse 65 it says, They're not going to allow any rest for your foot. You're going to be so broken. It says you're going to have such fear. And every day you're saying, I don't know if I can live. Rashi says, what does it mean you don't know you're going to live? Where's my bread coming from? We know the issue, the survival was bread. To get a loaf of bread, to get a slice of bread, that was the diet. And the Torah says that's going to be everyone's question every day. Where's my bread coming from? But boker tomar miyitin erev tomar miyitin boker. In the morning you're going to say, I wish it were night. At night you're going to say, I wish it were morning. Why? From the things that your eyes are going to see. Things that you never saw before. One speaks to survivors of the Shoah and they tell you just that. At night they wish for day, and day they wish for night. And they say they saw things with their eyes that they've never seen before. No one will ever see. The sights they saw of bodies stacked up one upon each other to be burnt. But the Tochacha doesn't stop there either. It says, and perhaps this is the most chilling of them all, right at the end, the last Tochacha says, V'his machartem sham lo eivecho, and you'll be sold to your enemy. Lavon shvachos, the slaves, v'ein kona, but there's going to be no one who's going to buy. Rashi explains to us, what does that mean? Rashi says, Hit machartem sham lo eivecho, you're going to be sold to your enemy. Atem mevakshim liyot nimchoim lahem lavon shvachos. You yourselves are going to say, just let me be a slave. How many Jews got off the trains at the death camps and said, just let me work for nothing. Let me work for free. I can do something, just let me live. But what's our enemy going to say back? Ain't kona. Rashi said, what does it mean they're not going to buy? Ki gizaru alecha herig v'kilyon. They're only going to want one thing, to see you die. A chilling description of the Tochacha. A chilling description of the Shoah. We ourselves are going to say, enslave us. And they're going to say, we don't even want you as slaves. But we're so valuable, we can be shoemakers, we can be doctors. No, we just want your death, that's all. Jews walked off the trains to Treblinka to signs that said, mockingly, saying, this is the gate to heaven. Jews walked off trains in Sobibor, in Belgium. There was no work camp. 250,000, 350,000, 800,000 Treblinka, straight from the train to the death. They don't even want us as slaves. They just want to see our kilyon v'herig, as Rashi points out. And that's what it means. There's going to be no kona. Nobody's going to buy. So we see psukim like this. What do we say? We can't ask why. The why is behind us. But I think what we do feel when we see this is that Hashem is predicting it. Hashem is telling us it. Hashem is making himself aware that there might be a time in Jewish history that will be this. And when we see these words, it doesn't depress, but makes us aware of the hashgacha. Hashem, you're there. I recall a story I saw one time in the camps in which a religious Jew was speaking to a non-religious Jew. And the religious Jew was broken. And the religious Jew was saying, I don't understand, Hashem, where is my God? And the non-religious Jew turns to him and says, what are you broken about? Don't you realize these are the words of our Torah? God is right there all along. But let's see a few other areas where we can discover the hashgacha of Hashem. Well, first of all, we see it just in the fact that the Nazis themselves evoked laws that said, Jews, we're not going to let you give up being Jews. Germany, the most assimilated of all nations, intermarriage over 50%. All of a sudden, laws out of Nuremberg, under this new party called the Nazis, which seemed to emerge also beyond any normal source. And they evoke laws of racial purity. Intermarriage is forbidden. They evoke laws where Jews lose their citizenship. They evoke laws where a Jew has to put on his passport, if he's a man, Yisrael, if he's a woman, she's a woman, Sarah. Finally, by 1939, laws in which we have to wear a Jewish star. Now, it's so interesting because Al-Khan Wasserman tells us that the reason why we came out of Egypt is we didn't change our names, our language, and our clothing. And he explains to us that as the persecution intensified in Egypt, the sages in Egypt realized that we have to start living like Jews again. They said, Jews, take on Jewish clothing, noki before, clean and elegant. Take back your Jewish names, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and start speaking Lashon HaKodesh again. Start identifying your real nationhood, not with the Egyptians. So again, what do we see? We see hashgacha. We see something divine hinting to us that there's a plan behind the scenes. And in fact, the Meshech Chochmah identified this already in 1926, already 6 years before the rise of Hitler. and said that there's going to be a fire that's going to emanate from Berlin. Why? Because of the fact that Jews have said that Berlin is our new Jerusalem. But I don't think the hashgacha stops there. I think we see the hashgacha in other ways as well. First of all, I think we see it just in the names. One looks at the names of the chief architect of the final solution, Eichmann. If we spell out Eichmann, Aleph Yud Yud Chaf Mem Nun, it's 131. That's interesting, because the name of the Satan, called the Sam Kel, is also 131. The job of the Sam Kel, the job of the Satan, is to create darkness through which we bring forth the light. Eichmann, 131, Sam Kel, 131. If we take the name of the Sam Kel and we drop the Samik, the Mem, and the Lam, and we take the remaining letters, there's a value there of 254. That's the same numerical value as Hitler, spelled Hey Yud Tet Lamed Reish. And how interesting it is when you add 254 to 131, it's 365, which is the numerical value of the Shekhinah. A divine presence hidden in the names of our enemies, meaning that there's a divine plan and there's a purpose. But I'd like to take you back even further right now in Jewish history. And I'd like to take us back to the story of Noach. And it says that Noach emerges from the flood and he emerges from the Teva. So he offers up an offering to Hashem. And the pasuk says that Hashem smelt it. V'yarech Hashem es yerech hanichoach. Hashem smelt this beautiful offering, this fragrant offering. V'yomer Hashem alibo, and Hashem says to his heart, Lo osiv l'kailo odes o adam before Adam. I'm no longer going to destroy the world again. Hashem smells this beautiful offering that Noach brings. The Medrash comments, and the Medrash wants to know, what did Hashem smell? What was that beautiful offering? What was that fragrant odor? V'yarech Hashem es reach hanichoach. The Midrash Rabbi tells us, Harech rechel shel Avram Avinu ola b'chifshan eish. It was the smell of Avram Avinu, who would not bow down to the idols of Nimrod, and was thrown into the fiery furnace, and he emerges alive. So when Hashem is smelling this fire, he's not necessarily only smelling the fire that Noach brought. He's smelling the fire that Avram Avinu emerged from. The Medrash continues and says, Vayarech, what did Hashem smell? Reich shel Chnanya, Mishael, v'Azaryah. We know the three great tzaddikim who refused to bow down to the Tselem, the idol of Nebuchadnezzar, and they too were thrown in a fiery furnace. Hashem created a nace, Hashem created a miracle, and they walked out. So what is Hashem smelling? What's the fire offering? He's smelling the fire that these three great tzaddikim walked out of. Chenanya, Mishael, Azaryah. And then the Midrash says something at the end. Hashem smelt a third offering. V'yarech Hashem hareach reach dorish hashmad. Hashem smelled the offering of the generation that was destroyed in fire. A generation that's destroyed in fire. And the Eitz Yosef on the Medrash comments and says, it was a generation that was brought into a fire, but did not emerge from the fire. What generation was thrown and brought into the fire, but didn't emerge from the fire? What generation was brought like a sacrifice in animal cars, in cattle cars, from every part of Europe to be brought into the fire, but not to emerge from the fire? It looks like the Medrash is telling us a piece of prophecy. There's going to be a generation in the future that's going to go into the fire, but not emerge. And yet Hashem is smelling that beautiful fragrance of that generation. There's something about that generation that died that's a beautiful fragrance to Hashem. But it's going to take a few thousand years in order to understand what it was and what it meant. It's interesting also when we look at Hashgacha, the fact that it was an animal offering. How interesting it is that in the Holocaust, the fact that Jews were brought like animals to their executioners might have been the only case like that in human history, where the victim is transported to the killer. Usually the killer comes to the victim. But let's just keep that thought in our minds for a moment. And let's jump to a statement made by the great Rabbi Rav Dessler. And Rav Dessler asks a question. And Rav Dessler's question is as follows. He's wondering about his own yeshiva. Rav Dessler was in Manchester during the war, but he's wondering about his own yeshiva in Chelm. And we know that the narrative of the Ukraine and Russia wasn't necessarily death camps. It was squads that would go out and execute, usually in their own backyard. 1.5 million just died through bullets, shot on the spot. And he asks the question and he says, Rabbi Shalom Tameu, there's so many who wonder and ask, Ma betsa b'misosos halalu. What was the purpose of these deaths? Elu mitok zeros shmad mesu. Elu, if they had only died because they were asked to do something, if they only died because they were said convert or die, and they said we're not converting, I can understand their death. Therefore they would have sanctified God's name by refusing. But that wasn't the case. The Nazis, when they murdered the yeshiva of Chelm and all the Jews who were shot in pits, or even when they were sent into gas chambers, they didn't request us to believe in anything, or to change our belief, or give up something. One thing just to destroy us. Lohami says, Kulam, al shenoldu Yehudim. All they wanted was to kill us. Why? Because we were born as Jews. And Rav Dessler says, Kima inin yesh b'zeh. Hein gam ev shos l'chai shmo yisborg lo nit laharugem. They didn't give us an opportunity to sanctify God's name. Im ken al ma'u lama. Why? Temosa Rabasi says, I don't understand. What was the purpose? I'd like to offer two explanations, perhaps, of where Hashem's hashgacha meets with these events. Number one, let's go back to what we just read. We just read that Hashem is smelling the sacrifice of Noach, and he's smelling a reach nichoch of the generation that was destroyed in fire. Now, it's interesting. I'd like to offer a thought that I saw in a sefer, Rabbi Tauber. And he says as follows. He asks a very interesting question by Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu at the Akedas Yitzchak offers up Isaac, and we know at the last minute God tells him not to do it. V'yomer Avram Avram, v'yomer hineni. Avram Avram, he says, I'm here. V'yomer al tishlach yodcha lanar. Don't send your hand forth to the boy. Al taslam oma. And not only that, don't even make a blemish. So Rashi says that Avram said to Hashem, he said, Hashem, if I can't even make a blemish, I can't draw blood, I've come for nothing. Let me at least do something. I'll make a little cut. I'll draw a little blood. So at least I did something, fulfilling your command to shech him. I didn't actually shech him. I didn't actually kill him, but let me do something. Shem says, don't do anything, Avram. Right? How about this interesting question? You know, before we do shechita, we make a blessing. Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvot tzivanu, al mitzvah shechita. We make a blessing over the mitzvah shechita before we shech the animal to eat it. Avram must have made the blessing. If he's given a command to shech the son, to kill the son, he made the blessing. And now Hashem is saying, don't do it. So there's a problem. What's the problem? It's a bracha levatala. Let me at least draw blood so it won't be a bracha levatala. The Gemara in Kedushin tells us something so important and so interesting. One of the ways that Hashem shows His love for us is Hashem says the following: Makshava tova b'tzarfa l'maisa. A good thought, Hashem says, I'm going to connect to a good action. What does that mean? Makshava tova b'tzarfa l'maisa. Shenema az nebaro yu Hashem isha re'eu v'yikashiv Hashem u'choshe shemo. Amar Rav Asi. Rav Asi says, "Afilu choshe odom l'sasos mitzvah." A person wants to do a mitzvah, but for some reason a person can't do the mitzvah. Hashem looks at him and says as if you did it. For example, a person might say, in my heart, I really want to give $1 million to tzedakah, to yeshiva, to a shul, whatever it might be. But I don't have the money. But someone else gives the $1 million. So Hashem says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to join together his gift with your thought. It doesn't work in reverse, by the way. Hashem will never put a bad thought together with someone else's bad action. But Hashem in His love for us says, I want to give you credit for the $1 million too. You wanted to give it, it hooks up with the action. So Hidabroot suggests something so beautiful. All those Jews who went to the pit and didn't know why they were dying, didn't have an opportunity necessarily to commit and say, we're dying because we're Jews, and we would never want to change our position. All those Jews who didn't have time or didn't have intention, what does Hashem do? Hashem hooks up someone else's thought to their action. Whose thought? Avram Avinu's. Avram Avinu 4,000 years ago made a bracha in order to sacrifice his son, but he was never able to fulfill it. 4,000 years later, those sons are now being sacrificed. Avram's mind, Avram's thoughtfulness, Avram's intention is connected now to their action. And their action now is seen as an action that has thought as well. Hashem in His infinite love for us allows Jewish history to span such a magnificent course. We're one body, one people, connected through time and space and history. And no one's death is therefore meaningless in any way. Avram's blessing and their death. However, I don't think it stops there. There were many Jews who understood exactly why they were dying. And it says, in fact, that the yeshiva in Chelm, led by Rav Daniel Moshevitz, the great tzaddik and mashgiach, he turned to the Nazi in charge and he said to him, before you shoot, we need a few more minutes. He's granted those minutes and he turns to his Talmidim and he says to his students, we are now going to die as korbanot. It's so necessary that our hearts be pure, that our minds be free of any distracting thoughts. Our death is going to be atonement for the Jewish people. I want everybody now to have a pure heart. The Talmidim look back at him, they nod. He turns towards his Nazi executioner and he says, we're ready, you can proceed. There were many Jews who did rise to that occasion, who understood that right now is a time to show Hashem exactly who I am and what I am. To show Hashem that our hearts are capable of loving you even now. I'm reminded of the story of the Rebbetzin, the mother of the Rebbetzin of the Telzer Rebbe, who at the point where the Nazis were about to shoot her and her children, she turns and says, shoot my children first. They happily oblige. As soon as they die, she takes dirt and she covers their eyes and their nose, their mouth, and she says, Baruch Hashem, that my children had the opportunity to have a Kavurat Yisrael, a Jewish burial. And then she turns and she says, now I'm ready also. So many Jews were able to have these type of hearts and types of thoughts and type of purity. And perhaps that's what Hashem was looking for. Define ourselves as a nation, define what a real Jew is. What are we capable of really now? Those Jews who weren't able were able to get Avram Avinu's blessing. But so many Jews were able to say we could do it on our own. And in my humble opinion, when we look for hashgacha in the Holocaust, we find it in so many ways. But I think the deepest place we find the hashgacha is to see what a Jew is capable of being. Hashgacha means God is present. That a Jew can rise and say, I'm ready. means there's something more than just an animal. It means that there's a Tzelem Elokim that understands there's a greater purpose for life, and I can sanctify life even now. Hashgacha, God's presence, its most powerful demonstration is in these actions of Jews. We look at the Holocaust, and we look at this time period. And I'll just end with a few final thoughts. Just to review, the war begins in 1939. We're reading the Tochacha. We're reading almost a perfect description of what's going to be the next 5 years of Jewish life. A Jew looking at it in 1939 and saying, oh my gosh, look what I was reading. And 1945, if he had made it, and said, I was being told my future. World War I, the beginning of it all, some say, also started in Tisha B'Av. The Wannsee Conference, as we mentioned, where the final solution was put into paper. Erev Tisha B'Av, 1942. The Nuremberg laws. Germans are telling us, change your clothing, your names, your language, reminding the Jew that they have to be a Jew. A directive from the general staff telling the army, don't let Jews from the east leave. They're called the Ostjuden. And the reasons are so interesting. Because the Ostjuden are going to be the Talmud teachers. And if we let the Talmud teachers survive, there's going to be a spiritual rejuvenation of the Jewish nation. A fire from Berlin. Berlin is our New Jerusalem. The Talmud tells us in Megillah, there's a nation called Germania. If that nation will unite, it will machrivas kola olam kulo. It will destroy the entire world. The Vilna Gaon says, don't read it Germania, read it Germania. The Talmud was written 1800 years ago. Germany became a nation in 1871. A nation which destroyed the world not once, but twice. The names, as we mentioned, of Eichmann and Hitler. Eichmann 131, Hitler 254, Samkal, the external letters 131, the remaining letters 254. You add them together, it's 365, the Shekhinah, the divine presence behind everything. The prophecy that we mentioned in Noach, a prophecy that talks about a generation that's going to go into the fire, but it's not going to come out of the fire. Avram's blessing that goes unfulfilled for 4,000 years, allowing Jews who might not have been able to know why they died to connect their actions with Avram's intention. Confusion, uncertainty, hatred. Menachem Zemba's statement that we don't know what to do. Whatever we did, whatever decision we made, it was wrong. And just to end on two thoughts. Number one, when Chaim Weizmann came to Germany, the first president of Israel, so he brought as a gift to the German minister, he brought a candelabra, a menorah from Jerusalem. A gift that's normally given from one head of state to another, something from your culture to theirs. He was presented by his German counterpart with a Talmud tractate Pesachim. And he was surprised, because usually you give something that belongs to you, not something that belongs to the other. And he said, I have a set of Talmud. This is ours. Why are you giving me this? I said, I have to tell you about this Talmud Pesachim. It was found. Where was it found? It was found in Hitler's bunker. When they went into Hitler's bunker in Berlin after the war, they found the Talmud Pesachim on the shelf. And I'd like to present it to you. Hitler thought he could destroy you and your Talmud and your people. He kept a copy of the Talmud Pesachim in his bunker. Why? Because Pesachim teaches about the eternity of the Jewish people. It teaches about Har Sinai and Pesach, and how God made us a nation through miracles. And he kept it there to say, look, these people are no longer God's chosen people. And Chaim Weizmann was offered this Talmud and said, I'm giving it back to you. The chosen people are still here. I don't think we could ask or attempt to know the whys. The whys are beyond us. Rav Shimon Schwab would say, despite the fact that we look and we see obviously there are signs of assimilation and everything we talk about. But the deepest why of the Holocaust is so beyond us. It belongs to the divine mind and the divine mind alone. However, I think what is in our purview, what is in our scope of analysis, is the intense hashgacha, the presence of God all through the entire period. Whether it be through predictions, whether it be through seemingly coincidences, but it indicates that God was there all along. And we have to say, when we see hashgacha, we feel God's presence. Like Eov said, Eov is comforted when God says, where were you when I created the world? I can't explain to you, I won't explain to you why you lost your family, but if you know it's me, you know there has to be purpose and there has to be love. And when we know there's purpose and love, we too can find healing and comfort in the period we call the Shoah.